The ATV rolled by once more, stirring up dust among the trembling trees that fought to remain upright. She passed as though the land owed her something, but what she failed to notice was a massive shadow, motionless and quiet, observing her every movement. When the moment was right, it would replace the wheat field and strike back. Have you ever witnessed someone confuse silence with surrender? If not, this tale will captivate you. My name is James Mitchell. I am a 55-year-old retired chief inspector from the Federal Land Management Bureau, now living a peaceful life on my 40-acre family farm nestled in the heart of Greenfield Estates. After years of enforcing land regulations, I sought tranquility until Rachel Martinez, a 42-year-old real estate attorney and HOA president, set her sights on my land. She viewed my farm as a barrier to her suburban plans and a potential fortune if she could push me out. What she did not understand was that beneath my calm farmer appearance was a man versed in every legal detail she intended to exploit. And I was prepared. Our first encounter took place on a sharp Monday morning in September. I was inspecting my wheat crop, about 3 weeks from harvest, when I heard the unmistakable roar of an ATV engine. Rachel's vivid red four-wheeler tore across my field, leaving deep tracks in the soft earth where my grandfather had taught me to sow 4 decades ago. She came to a stop about 10 feet from where I stood, turned off the engine, and stepped down as if the land belonged to her. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," she said while pulling out a tablet and stylus. "I am conducting my weekly security patrol and noticed several code violations on your property." I kept my tone steady, the way you do when dealing with someone who clearly does not grasp the situation. "Ma'am, this is private land, and it is not part of your HOA. You are free to patrol the streets and common areas, but you cannot drive through my wheat field." Rachel looked at me as if I had just told her the earth was flat. "Actually, Mr. Mitchell, this old cattle trail is a documented public access road. Any property that affects community standards and property values falls under HOA oversight authority. That is basic homeowners' law," she said with such practiced assurance that I almost doubted my own understanding of property rights. "Almost. I need to see that documentation," I replied. But Rachel was already photographing my fence line, my equipment shed, and even Felix grazing calmly in his pasture. "Fence height violation, maximum 6 feet in residential areas, inappropriate agricultural signage visible from community roads, livestock causing odor and noise disturbances impacting neighbors' property values." She listed the violations as if reading from a memorized speech, making notes on her tablet after each one. "You will receive formal notification within 48 hours, along with information on how to bring your property into compliance." With that, she climbed back on. Her ATV sped across my field, leaving fresh tire marks through the wheat. Those tracks destroyed months of effort and represented thousands of dollars in potential earnings. That afternoon, I went to the county records office and spent 3 hours examining property boundaries, easement documents, and historical surveys related to my land. What I uncovered confirmed what I had already suspected. There was no public access road crossing my property, no easement granting anyone the right to pass through, and absolutely no legal basis for the HOA to control anything occurring within my property lines. The cattle path Rachel mentioned was exactly that, a trail my grandfather had created by herding cattle between pastures, all entirely within our family's land. Additionally, I found something intriguing in the development records for Greenfield Estates. The original environmental impact report for the housing project explicitly stated that the Mitchell farm would stay private agricultural land, serving as a natural buffer between the residential area and the state highway. By Thursday of the first week, I had received 3 separate violation notices, each one more detailed and ominous than the previous. The first accused my fence of being too tall for a residential neighborhood. Apparently, my 40-year-old cattle fence violated subdivision rules designed for homes on quarter-acre lots. The second complaint criticized my private property signs for being harsh and unwelcoming to neighbors, suggesting I swap them for friendlier signs that encourage community unity. The third notice was an impressive display of bureaucratic excess, alleging that the odor from my cattle farm caused air quality problems that harmed nearby properties and might violate environmental protection rules. Each letter was printed on official letterhead, filled with formal language about deadlines for compliance, enforcement measures, and subtle warnings about potential legal consequences if I failed to act properly. Rachel had clearly done this before. These notices were designed to intimidate those unfamiliar with their rights, using legal jargon to make her demands seem official and unavoidable. However, after 25 years dealing with genuine federal regulations and actual legal authority, I saw right through her tactics immediately. Still, I had to respect the cleverness of her harassment strategy. This was not some amateur power play. Rachel was running a professional campaign aimed at wearing down opposition through endless paperwork and persistence. The second week escalated Rachel's efforts significantly. She hosted what she called a community standards workshop and sent official invitations to every home in Greenfield Estates, including mine. The invitation was elegantly crafted and printed on thick cardstock, written in a diplomatic tone that made Rachel come across as a sensible community leader aiming to tackle a challenging issue. It invited residents to join an important discussion focused on preserving property values and community standards in the neighborhood. Topics included concerns about farming activities in residential zones and finding solutions that benefit everyone. I did not attend the meeting, but Eleanor Patterson, who later became one of my closest allies, did, and she updated me on the events. Rachel had prepared a PowerPoint presentation featuring pictures of my property, including close-ups of my livestock, equipment, and even my house, which she had apparently taken by trespassing on my land. She spoke about how agricultural operations outside of local guidelines were impacting property values across the community, backing up her claims with carefully chosen statistics on home sales and market trends. "I'm not saying Mr. Mitchell is a bad neighbor," Rachel told the group of about 40 residents, "but we must consider how his actions affect the investments of 200 families who have chosen to live in Greenfield Estate." Eleanor informed me that a few neighbors inquired about my legal rights and questioned whether the homeowners association truly had control over my property. Rachel's answers were impressive and skillfully delivered. She never claimed to have legal authority over my property, but she spoke about community standards and neighborly cooperation in ways that made me appear unreasonable for not willingly meeting her demands. She mentioned that she had been trying to collaborate with Mr. Mitchell, but that I had been uncooperative and resistant to finding solutions that would benefit both sides. By the end of the meeting, she had successfully portrayed me as a stubborn individual, selfishly putting my own interests above the welfare of the entire community. The psychological pressure campaign that followed was both clever and relentless. Rachel started organizing what she called community walks, which always seemed to end at the edge of my land. Groups of neighbors would gather at the corner where the subdivision road met my fence line, and Rachel would lead them on educational tours about property values, community standards, and the importance of neighborhood cooperation. They never actually crossed onto my land, but would stand just outside my fence, taking photos and loudly commenting on the unfortunate state of my property, discussing how much better the neighborhood would look if my land was developed into something more fitting. These walks happened 3 or 4 times a week, always at different times and with different groups of neighbors. Rachel was systematically introducing every resident to the issue. Rachel from Greenfield Estates referred to this issue as the Mitchell problem, making sure that everyone in the neighborhood viewed my farm as a threat to their property values and overall quality of life. She highlighted how my cattle fence obstructed the view from several homes, how the farm's odor was most noticeable when the wind came from certain directions, and how the area would look much better with well-designed landscaping and community facilities instead of farming structures. However, Felix's greatest move was to involve government agencies in her campaign of harassment. During the third week, I received a call from the county agricultural inspector. He informed me that someone had lodged a complaint against my livestock operation, alleging that I was running an unlicensed commercial cattle business that posed environmental and health dangers to nearby residents. I spent an entire morning guiding the inspector around my property, presenting documents proving that my grandfather had registered the land for farming purposes in 1923, long before the area was zoned for residential use. The inspector was apologetic, but diligent, explaining he had to investigate every complaint, even those that appeared baseless. "Between you and me, Mr. Mitchell," he said near the end of the inspection, "this complaint seems to have been written by someone with legal motives. The person responsible for the complaint clearly knows exactly which phrases to use to trigger a mandatory investigation. Most people are not familiar with the precise terminology regarding environmental impact on nearby residential areas or adherence to current agricultural licensing rules. Whoever submitted this complaint understands the system well. The inspection revealed absolutely no violations, but it cost me an entire day of work and added an official government file to what Rachel was creating, a pattern of documented issues concerning my property. Next came the health department visit, prompted by accusations of waste runoff and pollution of groundwater caused by my cattle operation. Once again, the inspector remained professional, but was visibly annoyed by what he described as evidently retaliatory complaints. My farm had been functioning under the same environmental protocols for decades, performing routine water testing and managing waste in a way that surpassed county standards. Yet Rachel had submitted the complaint using precise technical terms about nitrogen concentrations and contamination of the water table that mandated a comprehensive environmental review, including soil and water sampling. This process took 2 weeks to complete. The fourth week brought a level of escalation that made me understand Rachel was not merely trying to bother me into compliance, but was constructing an extensive legal and social case aimed at forcing me to abandon my land altogether. The day began with At 6 o'clock in the morning, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, a process server handed me a thick envelope filled with legal papers. Rachel claimed that my activities were disturbing my neighbors' peaceful enjoyment of their homes and causing measurable financial damage by lowering property values. The lawsuit was a brilliant example of legal intimidation, blending genuine laws with imaginative interpretations in ways that would be costly and time-consuming to contest. Although I was confident I would eventually succeed, the challenge was daunting. Rachel accused me of creating noise pollution with my cattle and alleged that my farm machinery violated local noise rules. She also argued that my property attracted pests such as coyotes and wild pigs, which posed a threat to neighborhood pets. Furthermore, she insisted that my agricultural operations were incompatible with the residential nature of the nearby area. She demanded $50,000 in damages and sought a court order forcing me either to meet community standards or to stop farming altogether. The most devastating part was the environmental impact assessment that Rachel arranged through a private consulting company. They hired experts to scrutinize every detail of my farming activities that could be viewed as harmful to the surrounding residential community. This report spanned 43 pages and included photos, soil tests, air quality data, and an extensive evaluation of the situation. How my livestock operation was supposedly impacting everything from local wildlife behavior to the visual character of the neighborhood was documented in a meticulous, professional, and costly report. This kind of document costs tens of thousands of dollars to create, and most people lack the resources to challenge it. While examining the environmental assessment, I started to grasp the extent of Rachel's strategy. This was not merely about homeowners' association fees or neighborhood rules. She was methodically preparing a legal case that would pressure me into selling my land, likely at a considerable loss, to someone who would develop it according to her plans. The report stated that my 40-acre farm did not fit with the residential land use around it, and advised that the property should be changed to purposes that better suit the community. In simple terms, Rachel was employing environmental laws, nuisance legislation, and social pressure to take my family's property from us. The breaking point came on a misty Thursday morning in early October. I woke up to check on my wheat field, now only 2 weeks away from harvest, and found it ruined. Someone had driven an all-terrain vehicle through the standing crops in a purposeful design that spelled out "Move Out" in letters visible from a quarter of a mile away. 3 months of hard work, thousands of dollars spent on seed and fertilizer, and the hopes for my best harvest in years were wiped out in a single night of destruction. But Rachel's message was not over yet. An hour after I uncovered the damage, arriving with a camera team and 2 newspaper journalists she had somehow secured for media attention, Rachel called it a community meeting focused on property rights and neighborhood regulations. Standing in front of my devastated wheat field, cameras rolling and reporters jotting down notes, Rachel delivered a performance that could have rivaled any seasoned politician. This situation shows precisely why we need stricter community standards and improved collaboration among property owners, she declared, while gesturing at the destruction behind her. When some individuals place their personal interests above the well-being of the community, everyone pays the price. Felix Mitchell's unwillingness to cooperate with his neighbors has sparked the kind of disputes no one wants in their area, she insisted. She was using the ruin of my crops as proof that I was the troublemaker, implying that the vandalism was a natural outcome of my refusal to engage in constructive discussions. The journalists eagerly absorbed her words, asking about property values, community regulations, and whether farming should be permitted within residential zones. Rachel answered every question with well-rehearsed phrases that made her appear reasonable, while casting me as an unyielding barrier to progress. Watching her twist the damage to my livelihood into a tool for her agenda, I realized how grave a mistake it had been to underestimate Rachel Martinez that evening. Sitting in my kitchen, gazing at the devastation of my wheat field, I made a choice that would alter everything. For 25 years, I had been the federal inspector whom developers, lawyers, and corrupt officials feared the most, a man who understood every database, rule, and loophole in American land law. I had been approaching this as if it were a simple neighborly conflict, but Rachel had declared war. It was time to remember who I once was and what I was still capable of doing. I powered on my laptop and accessed federal systems I had not used in 2 years, using credentials still valid thanks to my consulting contract with the Bureau. What I uncovered within the first hour sent my hands trembling with a mix of anger and excitement. The entire Greenfield Estates development was built on land burdened by unresolved federal ownership disputes dating back to the year 1978. A series of bureaucratic mistakes and incomplete paperwork transfers had left the legal ownership of more than 300 acres in a kind of administrative limbo, allowing multiple parties to claim rights, but none having clear, undisputed title. More importantly, Rachel was aware of this. Her name appeared on dozens of documents pertaining to what the files described as complex title resolution procedures for the Greenfield Estates project. The real shock, however, lay hidden in a folder of scanned contracts I nearly overlooked. Rachel had signed a deal to sell 15 acres of available expansion land to Morrison Development Group for $2.3 million. The contract, valued at $1 million, was signed only 6 weeks ago and clearly included my 40-acre farm as part of the land package being offered for sale. Rachel was attempting to sell property she did not own, had never owned, and had no legal authority over. She was not merely bothering me to force me out of the neighborhood, she was plotting to earn millions by stealing my family's land. The extent of Rachel's deception became more apparent as I investigated federal records. She had been collaborating with Morrison Development for more than 2 years, assisting them in identifying properties across the region to be taken through what the documents described as administrative pressure and community standards enforcement. My farm was not Rachel's initial target. It was simply the latest in a series of properties that she had helped Morrison acquire by making life intolerable for the current owners. Federal records revealed similar tactics of harassment, legal threats, and coerced sales in 3 other communities where Rachel had acted as either an HOA board member or legal advisor. The following morning, an unexpected ally arrived who would be essential in unveiling Rachel's crimes. David Martinez appeared at my door at 6 o'clock in the morning, looking like he had not slept for days, carrying a cardboard box stuffed with documents. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, his voice trembling with fatigue and frustration, "I believe my wife has lost her mind, and I need your help to stop her before she ruins both our lives." While going through Rachel's home office after growing suspicious about her late-night phone calls and secret meetings with out-of-town business partners, what Felix discovered in Rachel's files revealed a pattern of calculated fraud that extended far beyond what I had found in the government databases. For over 2 years, she had been inflating homeowners association fees and diverting funds from the community maintenance budgets. She invented fake violations to justify thousands of dollars in fines collected from residents who were too scared to question her authority. The most damaging revelation was that she had forged Felix's signature on numerous legal documents, including the agreement with Morrison Development and multiple loan applications that used their house as collateral for her business schemes. "She treated our neighbors as if they were criminals," Felix told me, his voice trembling with emotion. "Mrs. Patterson was fined $300 for having the wrong mailbox color." The Johnsons faced a $500 penalty for excessive holiday decorations because they put up Christmas lights in November instead of December. Tom Rodriguez shared that Rachel threatened to get him fired from his security job if he did not file violation reports on the families she was targeting. Felix was not only offering to help reveal his wife's wrongdoing, but was pleading with me to stop her before she ruined the lives of everyone in the neighborhood. My second key ally came from an unexpected place that very same day. One afternoon, Eleanor Patterson, the 78-year-old retired librarian living 3 houses away from the HOA office, had been monitoring Rachel's actions for more than a year with great precision. Eleanor had spent 4 decades as a legal secretary before switching careers to become a librarian. Her keen eye detected schemes of fraud and exploitation that most people would have missed. "That woman has been operating a protection racket," Eleanor told me while we shared coffee in her kitchen, which was filled with neatly arranged boxes of paperwork. "She identifies problems with everyone's property and then offers to fix those issues for a price. I have been recording everything, waiting for someone qualified and empowered to take her on." Eleanor's files were remarkable in their thoroughness. She documented every sham violation, every irregular fine, every intimidating letter, and every suspicious encounter Rachel had engaged in over the last 18 months. She even secretly recorded Rachel's conversations with neighbors using a small digital recorder her grandson taught her how to use. "I might be old, Mr. Mitchell, but I am not foolish," Eleanor said, smiling. That moment reminded me why librarians have always been some of my most admired people. Rachel Martinez had chosen the wrong neighborhood to run her scheme. We had a retired federal investigator and a construction engineer ready to stand against her. Rachel understands fraud and is a former legal secretary skilled in building strong cases. She did not stand a chance then. The Greenfield Estates Community Center had never witnessed such a large gathering as on that Saturday morning in late October. Rachel had promoted the meeting as a discussion about exciting new development projects that promised to raise property values and improve community facilities. What she was unaware of was that David, Eleanor, and I had been quietly informing people about our findings, and federal agents were already preparing a criminal case with the evidence we had uncovered. Almost 200 residents filled the room, joined by reporters from 3 local newspapers, a television crew Eleanor had arranged through her journalism contacts, and several federal agents who had come to observe what they expected to be Rachel's final public appearance. Rachel entered wearing her finest power suit and carrying a leather briefcase that likely cost more than most people's monthly income. She had organized professional audiovisual equipment, hired a photographer to capture the event, and even brought flowers for the registration table. Every aspect of her presentation was meant to exude success, confidence, and authority. She had no idea she was stepping into a carefully planned trap that would expose everything. To put an end to her criminal activities and send her to federal prison, Rachel began clearly addressing the full room by saying, "Good morning, everyone. Today, I am thrilled to reveal a revolutionary collaboration that will reshape our community and greatly boost the value of all our properties. Felix Development Group has decided to acquire several plots of underutilized land in our neighborhood to develop Greenfield Commons, a luxurious amenities center featuring an 18-hole golf course, a country club with comprehensive dining and fitness options, and an upscale retail village." She moved to her first PowerPoint slide, presenting artists' impressions of meticulously maintained gardens and sophisticated buildings resembling those found in high-end resort brochures. The audience responded with appreciative murmurs as Rachel proceeded to explain that property values are projected to increase by approximately 30 to 40% once construction begins next spring. She mentioned job opportunities, higher tax income for the county, and the distinction of living next to such a prestigious development. "Some of you might be worried about Mr. Mitchell's property," she said as she clicked to a slide showing an aerial view of my farm. "I am pleased to inform you that legal action is in progress to acquire his land through eminent domain for the benefit of the community. Authorities have concluded that agricultural use of this land conflicts with the surrounding residential area. The development plan suggested that it would better serve the public interest to integrate this land into Greenfield Commons." It was an impressive presentation, skillfully blending credible legal jargon with enticing promises of future growth. Rachel had obviously done this many times before and understood exactly how to motivate a crowd of homeowners eager to see their property values increase. However, she made one critical error. She lied to an audience now fully aware of her true criminal actions. David stood up at the back, his complexion pale but his tone unwavering. He said, "Before my wife goes on with this presentation, I believe everyone ought to know she has been deceiving you all for over 2 years." The room went silent as David approached the front, holding a thick file of evidence. Rachel's confident smile faded as she grasped the situation, though she fought to stay composed. "David, this is neither the time nor place to air private matters. We will discuss any issues at home," she said. But David was relentless. "Rachel has been defrauding this community by fabricating violations to impose unlawful fines, and now she is attempting to sell land that is not hers," he declared, his voice growing firmer with every word. "The contract you just saw was forged with my signature. The land she is pledging to Morrison Development legally belongs to a different owner." The federal land trust and selling it would constitute a federal offense. The room immediately burst into shocked gasps and angry voices as the residents realized they had been systematically deceived by the woman they had trusted to safeguard their interests. Rachel tried to regain control by claiming that David was experiencing some kind of personal crisis and that his accusations were the result of marital difficulties. However, Eleanor Patterson stood up next, carrying her own box of evidence. She said, "I have been documenting Mrs. Martinez's illegal activities for more than a year, Ellen, and she has been charging unlawful fees, fabricating violations, and threatening residents who questioned her authority. I possess recordings, documents, and financial records proving she has been running a criminal operation using this HOA as a cover." That was when I stood up, and the room became so quiet that you could hear people breathing. "My name is James Mitchell," I said, letting my voice resonate throughout the entire room. "For 25 years, I served as Chief Inspector for the Federal Land Management Bureau. I investigated land fraud, development schemes, and unlawful property transfers across 7 states. Everything Rachel Martinez just told you is based on deceit, forgery, and criminal fraud, and I can prove every word of it." I clicked to my own PowerPoint presentation, revealing official federal land records, banking documents, and contracts that exposed the full extent of Rachel's criminal enterprise. The proof I provided was clear and indisputable. Federal land documents confirmed that Rachel held no lawful authority to sell or develop my land. Banking statements supplied by Felix revealed a deliberate misappropriation of funds from the homeowners association accounts. Video recordings from my surveillance system captured Rachel damaging my wheat field and unlawfully entering my property. The testimony of Eleanor exposed a consistent pattern of intimidation and extortion affecting numerous community members. However, the decisive moment came when Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Unit stood and identified herself. "Mrs. Martinez," Agent Chen declared with the firm tone typical of federal officers, "you are currently under investigation for mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and several breaches of federal racketeering laws. Based on the information we have analyzed, we will be carrying out search warrants at your residence and workplace on Monday morning. I highly recommend you seek legal counsel right away." The room exploded with stunned gasps and outraged voices as the residents grasped how completely and methodically they had been betrayed by someone they once trusted with the care of their neighborhood. Rachel's last moments of freedom were pathetic and frantic. She attempted to argue that everyone was against her, that I was an embittered old man aiming to ruin the community's future, and that Felix was... She was lying due to their marital troubles, yet her voice trembled and her legal background failed to help her justify her actions. Financial records and government paperwork, along with her confident appearance, completely fell apart when Eleanor rose and revealed that she had been documenting Rachel's unlawful activities for more than a year. The atmosphere shifted from puzzlement to anger as Tom Rodriguez admitted that Rachel had been coercing him into producing false violation reports. The outrage turned into intense fury when a motion to immediately remove Rachel as HOA chairwoman and freeze all association accounts was passed with a vote of 147 to 3. Security footage showed Rachel leaving the community center in tears, while residents yelled questions about their missing money, fabricated violations, and the lies she spread regarding my property. The local news that evening featured the headline, "HOA Chairwoman Uncovered in Multi-Million-Dollar Fraud Scheme." By Monday morning, the story had been covered by regional and national news outlets captivated by the extent and boldness of Rachel's criminal operation. 8 months after that tense October morning, Rachel Martinez stood in federal court admitting guilt to several charges including mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, and breaching federal racketeering laws. The woman who had terrorized an entire neighborhood with false violations and illegal fees was now facing up to 20 years in federal prison. Judge Patricia Williams spoke plainly at the sentencing hearing. "Mrs. Martinez, you betrayed the trust of more than 200 families who believed you had their best interests at heart. Instead, you methodically stole from them while preparing to sell their community behind their backs for your own gain. This kind of fraud attacks the very foundation of what allows communities to thrive and function." Rachel was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution exceeding $600,000 to the Greenfield Estates community. Her law license was permanently revoked, her assets were confiscated to cover the restitution, and she was banned for life from holding any HOA leadership role. The Morrison Development Group underwent a parallel federal investigation. Eventually, they were found guilty of conspiracy and bribery related to Rachel's scheme. The company was shut down, its leaders imprisoned, and the luxury development they had planned became a cautionary example studied at law schools and in business ethics classes. Felix Martinez, who showed remarkable bravery in uncovering his wife's crimes despite his personal sacrifices, was unanimously elected as the new HOA chairman. His first initiative was to create a fully transparent governance system where all financial records were open to the community, and every major decision required collective approval. No single individual had the power to change community rules on their own, and with that in place, the monthly HOA fees decreased from $200 to $50, covering only essential maintenance and insurance. The community decided to remove over 80% of Rachel's arbitrary regulations, retaining only those rules that truly safeguarded property values and safety. What had once been a system marked by oppressive petty control transformed into a shining example of democratic community management, inspiring other neighborhoods across the state to follow suit. Felix collaborated with local officials to introduce new oversight measures for HOAs, ensuring the kind of widespread fraud Rachel had orchestrated could never happen again. The Mitchell Act, named in recognition of my efforts to uncover the corruption, now mandates all HOAs in the state to conduct annual independent audits, make their financial statements accessible to community members, and undergo regular reviews by county authorities. The federal investigation sparked wider reforms in HOA regulation across the region and helped uncover similar fraudulent activities in communities spanning 3 states. Real estate lawyers serving on HOA boards must now reveal all potential conflicts of interest and face increased professional supervision. Federal prosecutors used Rachel's case as a blueprint to investigate other corrupt HOA officials, resulting in dozens of further prosecutions and millions of dollars in recovered stolen assets. What began as harassment from one woman turned into a powerful movement for justice. The campaign against a stubborn farmer evolved into a nationwide reform movement that safeguarded thousands of homeowners from similar exploitation. My 40-acre farm unexpectedly became a powerful symbol of property rights and community resistance to corruption. The wheat field that Rachel had destroyed was replanted and yielded the best harvest in 25 years, producing enough grain to cover my legal fees and finance a scholarship program for local high school students aiming to study agriculture or law. Bird and my prize bull, Felix, turned into local celebrities. Children in the neighborhood would ask their parents to drive by just to catch a glimpse of the famous bull who had helped stop the bad lady. Local tour groups started including my farm in their itineraries, and I began delivering talks about property rights and community activism to interested visitors. The community voted to rename the main road Mitchell Boulevard and installed a historical marker describing how a retired federal inspector had saved their neighborhood from fraud and corruption. The marker features a bronze plaque with Felix's image and the inscription, Sometimes the best defense against those who abuse power is simply refusing to be moved. Local law schools started using the case as a teaching example, and I was invited to speak at conferences on property rights, community governance, and the importance of standing up against corruption. The case became required reading in several institutions. Criminal justice programs were introduced, and the story was featured in a documentary about HOA abuse that earned multiple journalism awards. However, the most rewarding change was the community's own transformation. Where Rachel had spread fear, doubt, and division during her reign of terror, Felix's leadership encouraged unity and sincere neighborly support. The HOA budget that once financed Rachel's harassment campaigns was now invested in community gardens where families cultivated vegetables together, festive events that united the entire neighborhood, and a scholarship fund that had already helped 12 local students pursue higher education. The same neighbors who had previously lived in fear under Rachel's arbitrary rules now collaborated to build a place where families truly wanted to settle down and raise their children. Eleanor Patterson took on the role of community historian, preserving the lessons learned from what everyone now referred to as the Rachel era, while making sure future residents recognized the need for constant vigilance against corruption and abuse of power. Tom Rodriguez was promoted to Community Security Director and created programs that genuinely increased residents' sense of safety instead of making them feel monitored. Partnering with local police, he helped launch neighborhood watch initiatives and emergency response plans that united people rather than dividing them. The community center, once the scene of Rachel's authoritarian meetings, was transformed into a lively gathering place. Democratic activities included hosting town hall meetings, organizing volunteer coordination sessions, and social events that celebrated the neighborhood's diversity and resilience. As I conclude writing this story, 4 years have passed since that October confrontation that changed everything. Rachel is currently serving her sentence at a minimum security federal prison in Arizona, working in the prison library and reportedly pursuing a degree in social work. This career change seems both ironic and somewhat hopeful. Felix has remarried a wonderful woman named Sandra, an elementary school teacher who approaches community leadership as a form of service rather than a position of power. Their style of HOA governance has become a model that other neighborhoods study and implement, proving that communities can be managed democratically and transparently without sacrificing efficiency or property values. The Morrison Development Group went bankrupt amid the federal investigation, and its executives faced legal consequences that sent a strong warning to other developers considering similar schemes. The land they had planned to develop illegally was eventually bought by the county and transformed into a nature preserve, offering hiking trails and habitats for local wildlife. Felix is now 13 years old and remains the undisputed king of his pasture, although he spends most of his time peacefully grazing and enjoying treats from neighborhood children who adore him. He became a local hero. The wheat field that ignited this entire conflict has turned into a kind of landmark for advocates of property rights and community activists from all over the nation. I receive letters from farmers, homeowners, small business proprietors, and community leaders who are facing their own struggles with dishonest officials, oppressive homeowners associations, and deceptive development plans. Some come to visit the farm to witness the place where it all began, and I am always glad to share what I have learned about resisting abuse of power while building communities that truly prioritize the interests of their residents. The most important lesson I convey to these guests is that bullies and con artists rely on their targets feeling isolated, confused, and too frightened to confront authority. But when communities unite, when people exchange information and encourage one another, and when they refuse to bow to intimidating official-sounding warnings or false legal claims, even the most advanced fraudulent schemes can be uncovered and stopped. Rachel's scam lasted as long as it did because she persuaded people she had genuine authority, that her rules were legitimate laws, and that opposing her would be costly and futile. Standing in my wheat field today, watching Felix calmly chew on grass while children from Greenfield estates visit with their parents to hear the story of how their community stood up against corruption, reminds me that courage and unity can triumph over deceit. I am reminded that justice is not only about punishment, but also about healing and prevention. Rachel's fraud was uncovered, her victims received compensation, and the community she aimed to exploit emerged stronger, more democratic, and better prepared to face future threats. The land she attempted to steal, worth millions of dollars, remains intact and thriving. Wheat continues to grow there, and it is still home to a bull who unwittingly became a symbol of resistance against oppression and greed. The sign at the entrance to my farm still says Mitchell Family Farm, established in 1923, but now it bears an additional line that the community chose to add, protected by law and community. This story is not simply about one person's battle against a corrupt HOA leader, but about a whole community's decision to embrace transparency instead of secrecy, collaboration instead of control, democracy instead of authoritarianism, and justice instead of fear. And Felix, well, he remains the guardian of his land, grazing peacefully in a field where the wheat reaches high. The community understands that truth will always defeat falsehoods, and neighbors watch out for one another against those who misuse power for selfish purposes.